Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for being here. Great to see all these faces. Um, as you're coming into the Zoom room, we have a little bit of a get to know you, a way to just hear a little bit about how you're showing up today for this conversation. So if you can see the slide, we're just going to come off mute and introduce ourselves by picking one of these phrases. I care about, I know about, I'm curious about, just one of them, and finishing that phrase for yourself, for the group, for how you'd just one piece of how you'd like to show up today, so we can get to know a little bit about each of you. And I could kick that off with I care about the future deeply because I have 3 kids. So I really care about what this world is like 70 years from now. And that's one of the reasons I'm here. So this is a good chance to come off mute and test your audio.
Yeah.
Not going to
And
call
I making leading clear and making leaders common because I care about the future as well, and we'll need lots of leaders in lots of places.
I can jump in. I know less and less about more and more the more I learn.
Hi, I'm Joel. I can say I'm a promiscuous seeker to my own detriment. I love exploring new ideas, new practices, new things that people are up to in the world.
I will come off. My name is Pamelia Robinson, and I am a lifelong learner. I love to learn, and all that I learn and experience helps to influence my coaching.
Thank you, Pamelia.
I'm Rose. I live in Canada. I care about leadership and getting better at coaching about it. So that's why I'm in here today.
I'm Perry Strawn. I'm from Philadelphia. Hi, Joel. Nice to see you. I care about, creating the space and presence for leaders to transform in the way that's needed in the world today. Thank you so much for pulling us together.
Hi, I'm Wendy. I am in Maryland, just outside of DC, and I'm glad to see everyone here. I care about what most people might say too much, because I always speak to everybody, whether they speak back or not. So I care about making people happy all the time.
Thanks, Wendy. And for those of you who just came in, we're just introducing ourselves via using one of these phrases on the slide, just one of them, and filling out the rest of the sentence. So jump in anytime.
Hi, I'm Basir Rayat. I'm a crisis management expert. I care about basically societal problem, defense, security, and this is I know about crisis management foresight. And I would consider myself a troublemaker, but for the past decade, it's been considered a disruptor because a lot of things needs disrupting to be built up from the bottom up again. Thank you.
Happy to jump in. I'm Kelly Griffith. I am originally from Philadelphia, so nice to see so many from the East Coast. I'm based in the UK, and I care deeply about the world of work and what we are building for the future, for future generations, and what work will look like for them.
Hi, I'm
Go ahead,
Sandrine.
Okay, I'm Sandrine Provost. I'm based in Singapore. So hi from the evening. I know you're in the morning. Most of you are during the day. And I am an executive coach, and I care about achieving breakthrough and also about helping leaders achieve their purpose as well. Thank you. Glad to be here.
I am Jeanne-Envie Adotevi. I'm calling from France, and I am an executive coach too. I care about well-being and psychological safety. I know about complexity, and I'm curious about AI.
I see a lot of folks here. If you want to fill in your answers to this question in the chat so we can get to know you even more and so we can move the conversation along, that would be great. So feel free to go into the chat and put in your answers to these questions so we can all get to know each other. We'll have some breakouts and a chance to do that as well. And for all of you who are here, thank you for joining us for this Voices session and for joining the Prometheus Project, which, for if any of you are new, it's an initiative where we're trying to address the challenges of leadership development. And to that end, today our discussion is about the intersections of coaching and leadership. So my name's Jeff Golde. I'm happy to be your facilitator to hopefully just facilitate the lively discussion, make sure your voices are heard, along with our great panelists who are here. They're going to introduce themselves in a few minutes. You've started to introduce yourselves. We're going to give you a chance to introduce yourselves to each other, but I want to make sure on a technical front, so this can be an interactive discussion, we're all clear, even though we've been on Zoom for a while. If you have a question when we get to Q&A, we're going to use the raise hand function. Can we, and in case you don't know, in case you use Teams instead of Zoom, if you look down or up, there should be a button that says reactions. And if you press that reactions button, it should say raise hand. Can you all try raising your hand just so we know we can roughly do it? And of course, you can always throw in chat your questions as well, just in case. Okay, I've got Bill clapping, but I'll take that as a hand raise as well. Okay, good. And we can put the hands down. If you have any technical questions, just put them in chat. Someone will be able to help you over there as well. So that's going to be one feature for us having a discussion with everybody. The second is a new feature if you've been with Voices or seen any of the Voices before, which is called the elephant in the room. And we have an elephant spotter as well, Tiffany Zamet, with us today. And just in brief, and then I'll let her introduce herself. You know, sometimes we all have questions that we really want to ask that are really poignant and on point, and maybe we feel uncomfortable asking them. Maybe the dynamics of the conversation or the setup today as a panel makes it difficult or makes it feel like you don't want to ask that question publicly, but we want to make sure that the most important questions are asked. So we have the elephant spotter, which is Tiffany. And Tiffany, why don't you introduce yourself and tell folks how they get these important questions to you and what will happen?
Okay, so I'm Tiffany, and to help in fostering more meaningful interactions between the audience and the expert guests, we're introducing an elephant spotter segment to help question approaches and acknowledge potential shortcomings through constructive feedback. So if something in the presentation is troubling you, don't simply nod in agreement. Rather, address it by dropping your comments and a direct message to me. And later on, we'll frame the conversation in a way that encourages deep reflection. Our reasoning for this is threefold: to catalyze growth and improvement, to build trust and credibility, and to further stimulate intellectual discourse. The bottom line: candid conversations are good for us. By embracing the elephant spotter approach, we all contribute to the ongoing evolution of expertise and knowledge sharing in our communities. So again, throughout the presentation, if something isn't sitting right with you, don't let the moment pass by. Instead, drop me a comment in the chat and we'll circle back to it later. Again, I'm Tiffany and I'm in the chat.
Great. Thank you, Tiffany. So that means you go to chat, and instead of broadcasting to everyone, make sure you use the selection menu to select Tiffany's name, and that sends a direct private message to her. Later on, when we start the Q&A, I'll ask Tiffany, who will have looked through these, if there's several, to pick one or two that she'll bring to the fore and ask the panel about, right? So we'll use that, and then we'll allow you all to have a Q&A session as well. So today, just to remind you again, for those of you who just joined us, our conversation is about the intersection of leadership and coaching. So our panel brings together a group of thinkers. They come from many different fields. They're coaches, they're leaders, they're academics, they're founders, they're entrepreneurs. Sometimes they're all of those things all at once, right? So with their views and the views of the audience, hopefully this can be a discussion that leads to, I don't think any, maybe there'll be a few firm conclusions. Hopefully we'll find more threads to explore. It should open up new pathways, new questions, I would expect by the end of this. So to allow our panel to set their own context, I invited them to introduce themselves so we can understand how they're bringing themselves to this space. So why don't I ask Joel? I didn't tell them what order. So Joel, you're on the spot first to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Joel. So I'm a coach and I'm an entrepreneur. So I tend to coach a range of people, but they are often leaders who have had a successful career in a corporate sense, and now they're moving out to start a legacy project. But I'm really not fussy. I really have some a wide range of beautiful clients. And the other thing that I do, I'm co-founder of a company called Coaches Rising, and we provide online training programs for coaches. We've been around for about 14 years, and we run about 5 or 6 different programs a year. And we collaborate with some of the best minds, I think, in coaching and leadership and neuroscience and adult development theory, topics like that. I'm very passionate about the role that coaches can play in these times. And I live in Amsterdam. So I'm British, but I live in Amsterdam.
Wonderful. Thanks, Joel. Kelly, how about we turn to you?
Sure, thank you. I'm Kelly Griffith. I am based in the UK, originally from the US. My background is more, I guess, what you call general HR tech. So I've had a habit that I didn't intentionally fall into, but I guess I went into building online HR solutions early on in my career. And then in the past 7 years, really a lot around strategy and innovation and building within corporate environments. So I'm the Chief Coaching Officer at Ezra, which is a global coaching platform that's part of the Adecco Group and LHH. And I'm one of the founding leadership team members of Ezra. And it's been really exciting to see it grow from an idea on a PowerPoint slide 5 years ago to now we're doing about 1,000 coaching sessions a day on the platform and working with hundreds of companies and helping them create better cultures, better leaders, and really making an impact on the world of work.
Thanks, Kelly. Tom, why don't you go next?
Could you try?
David.
So I'm undefinable to myself and most people, but I think the key points are I'm the founder of the Prometheus Project, which is trying to help us all reach a little bit more cohesion and alignment around who leaders are and what leaders do, and therefore inform how we develop leaders so that we have those as goals. I also am an executive coach. Part-time I do that. Part-time I do executive coaching, and full-time I do the Prometheus Project work. And happy to come back to our fall season. But my other part of me as a background is really senior positions in large companies for a 40-year business career. So I bring that world of work perspective and some pretty sharp radar around how people affect that positively and negatively, which connects it to the leadership piece.
Wonderful. David.
Hey, everyone. Good to see you here. Thanks for showing up for this session. It's great to be back on Voices. I'm a professor of psychology and leadership at Claremont McKenna College, where I'm also academic director of a leadership institute there. I may be the only one on this call this morning who's not a coach, but I work a lot with coaches, primarily in regard to the development system that we use with college students. So Claremont McKenna is an undergraduate liberal arts college, pretty small, but we offer coaching to any of our about 40 or 50 students at the Leadership Institute who've been with us for at least a semester. And so I've seen the effects of leadership coaching on this young audience. And I've also had a chance to interact quite a bit with coaches who are working not only with students, but also in executive capacities to get a sense of how they approach the coaching questions that prevail in these kinds of interventions. So it's great to be with you. I'm looking forward to the conversations.
Wonderful. Thank you all. So it sounds like we've got the intersection of leadership, coaching. Some of you are coaches who are leading organizations. Some of you are in the academic sphere, leading places in the academic sphere. So it should be a good conversation to open up these new threads. To get started, though, let's have you all introduce yourselves to each other. We're going to send you out to breakouts for maybe about 8 minutes or so. And I didn't put up the question here. To talk about this question, once it gets up there, about someone in your life who changed your self-experience and what happened. Hopefully that was a great breakout session for everyone as you're coming back in. Got the juices flowing, got you all to know each other a bit. We'll have some more time later to process the conversation we're about to have. And if any questions came out of that, just write them down, keep those close, and I promise we'll get to Q&A in the second hour. So now that we're back, I want to turn it back over to our wonderful panel and get them started with a question and see where this discussion takes us. So the question I wanted to start with, since we're looking at the intersection of leadership and coaching, is just simply, do leaders need coaches? So with that, I will actually, unless no one jumps in, leave it to the panel to see who wants to address that first. Do we have Kelly back? Yep, we do. Does someone want to jump in on that first? Kelly, you came off mute, so I might go to you.
Oh, no. Okay, I'll go. Rookie mistake. No, I would say I have two minds about this. So one, I think the best way to develop coaching skills, I think, is to be coached. So I do think through the process and having a coach, it can help leaders be more open-minded, view different perspectives, challenge assumptions, like all of that stuff, right? But I do think there's a dark side of it and something to be aware of, that I think sometimes you can forget to lead. So if we become so tied to the fact that we should all become coaches and we need a coach and everybody should be a coach, sometimes I think we can take the eye off of, like, sometimes you need to lead and sometimes you need to manage, and you need to know how to balance that.
I can jump in next. The question is about, do leaders need coaching? And I think that's an interesting way of framing it in terms of needing it for what. I mean, I've been around organizational psychology and leadership for long enough to know that when coaching first started, it was pretty much remedial. You got a coach if you were really screwing up and they wanted to fix you. So if you had a coach, it was kind of a sign to everybody else in the organization. It's like, uh-oh, watch out for this person because they're going down. Now, how the story has changed. It's if you don't have a coach, something is wrong with you because the organization doesn't see you with potential to lead. So when you ask about do leaders need coaching, I think some of them think they need a coach simply as kind of a social identification badge to others in an organization that they have potential. But to take it in a different direction about, do they need them to lead better? I think it depends on how much ownership that individual takes in their own development. And if they come into a coaching session expecting a leader to guide them to the holy grail of leadership, that's just a non-winning situation. I've never seen or heard a coach who thought that was the case, by the way. But I think there are some people who naively enter into a coaching relationship with unrealistic expectations. And the best coaches are the ones who clarify those expectations and put the onus on the developing leader to kind of figure out and own their own development. And that can be incredibly helpful, especially because reflection, I think, is key to learning and it's key to development. And having a good coach who asks great questions and insightful questions can be incredibly helpful in that growth and development process.
I could build on, I just want to build a bit on what David's saying there. I definitely would advocate that leaders can really benefit from coaching. I know I've experienced that myself as the leader of an organization. And yeah, just being able to get outside, someone who can see outside of myself and help me learn about who I am and see the places where I'm stuck, the blind spots that I'm having, and to support me in that deeper transformational work is just, I think, really valuable. That being said, like I would say, there are leaders out there who've never had coaching and do an amazing job. And I also think that we as the coaching community need to be humble. I think there are a lot of coaches out there who coach leaders and they have never, there are many who have, but there are many who have never led in that type of position. And so we can kind of come from certain principles and beliefs and perhaps underestimate the situation the leader is in, the complexity, the challenge that the leader is in, and maybe even become frustrated when they don't get it as quickly as we would like. So yeah, that's what I would say.
So I'll just add in what came up for me with this question, which is I don't know. Well, first of all, I think of leaders as anyone who is in a position where they can make a change. So I automatically am wired not to think of it as executives exclusively. So I think people need the things that coaches do, and coaches are well trained to do those, hopefully. And so I think it's developmental for people to have conversations and to find language that helps them assemble who they are and what they want to do. And I think coaching provides that opportunity. I think it's helpful for people to have other people who listen to them and afford them the opportunity to be seen and to express themselves openly. And I think everyone needs those things, and so therefore everyone needs coaching.
I think coaching, to follow up on what Kelly, Joel, and Tom said, I think coaching is also incredibly helpful in terms of helping people make sense of formal assessments. I'm a real big proponent of formal assessments, at least the good ones. And it provides a lot of valuable data about what you are like. But for most people, they're not trained to interpret and understand assessments. And even, assessments like 360-degree feedback, where you get conflicting kinds of reports from different sources. A coach can be very helpful in clarifying why these inconsistencies are there and what to do about them, which kind of is a long-winded way of getting to my point, is that some people get into coaching because they were one of these excellent leaders in a large organization who rose to the top and have since retired. And they're like, well, what do I do next? Oh, I'll either be a college professor or a coach. And they're probably not well trained for either one of those. So those who have gone back and have received certification or have taken on the kind of training needed to become a good professional coach, hats off, tip of the hat to those people, because some of the things that they're asked to do require formal training, like understanding self-assessments and how to interpret them and how to help other people interpret those assessments.
Great. I want to pick up on just one thing Tom said about leaders being in all facets of life. So I think just to make sure we can expand the conversation, that this isn't just necessarily about formal corporate leaders. This could be leading your family, having some sort of leadership role in your community, formal or informal, a la the first question we asked as well. And so we also know the coaching field has expanded. It's not just sort of in corporate. People have life coaches. I had a list here somewhere of all the kinds of coaches: performance coaches, high performance coaches, nutritional coaches. There's lots of types of coaches, and all those folks are trying to lead in some way in their lives. So I said, do leaders need coaches? We had a comment here. Maybe it's, do they benefit at all from coaches? Some comments in the chat saying some do. Some people are able to find a way to lead themselves. So I think we do need to back up, which is, there's a great diversity of answers across the panel, which is great. Maybe we'll take a moment to talk about what we mean by coaching, so that's clear, and also leadership. I kind of didn't want to go there, but if we can, in brief, we know that those are both full conversations, but so we know where each of you are coming from, if you could sum up what coaching means to you and start to get at what leadership means to you as well, or maybe get at what coaching means to you. I think that's important to set the stage for the audience here. And you can respond also to anything you've heard. Joel, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I can say for me, I mean, I can understand why you're reticent about this question, because there's many ways we could define what coaching is. There's so many different types of coaching out there, but I guess like one way I would describe it is it's a way of supporting an individual or groups towards their unfolding. That's a word my friend Perry will know from someone who's been a great mentor to me, Steve March. Their unfolding or their development. They're supporting them with this development, which is basically so they can act in alignment around their deepest commitments. So the coach is helping them with that process through helping them build self-awareness around parts of themselves or ways of being that may be getting in the way of them fulfilling these deepest commitments. Leadership. I wanted to say pass. I'm on my own journey around leadership this year. I've been really provoked by, Tom will know this, people like Dave Snowden, who's a great kind of person to follow online. I guess for me, I'm really curious to hear what the others say, but leadership is really equally as important to talk about followers and context. So I think we've talked about leaders in this kind of atomized way, like maybe as a fixed set of competencies. And so my own exploration is how can we see leaders as a relational, it's a relational endeavor, and we are together moving around a shared common purpose, towards a shared common purpose in a social group, and the leader is supporting in doing that. I'm sure there's a lot more I could say, but I'll stop there. Yeah.
Very, very succinct, Joel. I like that. Yeah. I'll take my stab since I interrupted. I have too much to say about leadership, but my simple answer is I think it's a choice that we all make to prepare ourselves and to engage with others to effect some kind of change in the world, to make the world and the workplace what we want. And so we take that responsibility or seize that opportunity to take some action. And that can be obviously a very small setting, or it can be a very large setting, right? Society, sustainability, those are big, super leadership things, but it can just be, let's open this conversation because we need to have this conversation as well. Coaching, boy, I'm the opposite, Joel, of you, as I still haven't worked on a good summary of what coaching is, other than it is a relationship, a developmental relationship, I would say, that focuses on the ability and capability of the person being coached, and not the coach is the neutral party to their evolution. I'll say that.
Yeah, and I would say, and building on that, Tom, not just neutral party, but I think probably maybe even towards an advocate for the coachee. And I think for me, coaching or the coaching process is around empowerment, building confidence. I think Pamelia mentioned in the chat, the creative, resourceful, and whole. So really helping individuals realize that they are the experts in their field, and they are the ones that can come up with the solutions, but helping them to get there, which I think in, whether it's corporate world, personal life, I think that it's very rare for people to have somebody who's shining a spotlight and saying, like, you got this, right? You can do this. So let's talk together about, how we can approach this. And I think it's also about tying personal meaning to things. So I think in the day-to-day work we do at Ezra, a lot of it is, how does that individual tie personal meaning to the organizational objectives of that company, right? And how do they tie that to what's important to them as individuals so that they can be happy and be successful within that role. Leadership, I mean, for me, I think it's, clarifying, cutting out the noise, finding a direction, inspiring, and getting engagement from those around us on how we push through that.
Thanks, Kelly. David? Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute, David.
I was just saying I was multitasking and apparently not doing a good job at any of the individual tasks at large. So let me what I was accessing was a link to an article that I want to talk about in terms of both coaching as well as the meaning of leadership. And I'll put the link to that, which I think is an open access article, so you'll be able to access it for those interested in more of an academic perspective on this. When I think about coaching, again, I'm not a coach. I'm an academic. I study these kinds of things, and I've interacted and seen the benefits of coaching with our students. But what I liked about what Kelly was saying was this notion of like, I think I can do it. I think I really can be a leader. I've struggled in certain domains, but this is something that I'm starting to get at. Well, to a more academic perspective, that's really one of the self-views that myself and a co-author had talked about in an annual review piece around leadership development, which are self-views. And we frame them as proximal indicators of leader development, that development is happening. So there's a lot of focus on KSAs, knowledge, skills, abilities, competencies, concrete skills, whereas the self-views are really, how do you see yourself? What is your leader identity? Do you have a leader identity? What does that mean to be a leader to you? Your leadership self-efficacy, how confident are you to exercise leadership when it's needed? What are the situations where you feel more or less confident to be a leader when needed? And also this third self-view, which is self-awareness. A coach can be incredibly helpful in helping to surface assumptions that people have that they may not be aware of, and also blind spots that they may, well, by virtue of the definition, they're unaware of. So these notion of self-views, I think, are those kinds of things that coaches can be incredibly helpful in terms of building a leader's sense of self as a leader. And the good news is that these things, by all the research that we know about, they change relatively quickly compared to some of the longer term kinds of things that people talk about when they talk about leader development. So a coach helping a person with their self-views, I think, is an important task. In terms of what does leadership mean? Well, we all know books have been written about that. And I think one of my colleagues, former colleagues, talked about there are as many definitions of leadership as people who've studied it, right? So most of the focus tends to be leader-centric on a particular individual who then creates leadership or is thought to create leadership in some sort of context or situation. That's predominant, but it's limited and limiting. I like the fact that some people think about leadership can come from anything. It could come from an individual, it could come from a collective. It could come from something that's in the system that's not an individual. And colleagues at the Center for Creative Leadership have talked about three ontological factors of leadership that open things up in ways that are just not about the leader, the follower, and a shared goal. I mean, they talk about setting direction, creating alignment, and building commitment. So anything or anyone or any group that engages in or creates direction, creates alignment, or builds commitment can be said to be creating leadership. And that doesn't need to be something that a leader puts into the system. It's something that can be drawn from a system of people interacting together. So I like this approach because it opens the aperture beyond leader-centric and kind of romanticized and heroic notions of leadership, which tend to come back to, well, it's all about the leader. And it's really not. And yeah, DAC is direction, alignment, and commitment. So I'll stop here, and I'll put a link to that article in the chat for people.
Great.
I'll just chime in that the DAC model concept is something that, from the Prometheus view, is one of the essential evidences of what leaders are trying to create. But we have expanded a little bit to include that two other areas that are adjacent to that, and that is simply creating clarity and understanding and comfort with kind of complexity, which is a precondition for doing the DAC types of activities as a leadership end in itself, as is creating the comfort and the ease and the relationships that allow people to engage in those DAC types of activities effectively, and the knowledge creating type of activity. So our kind of simple view of leadership is leaders do three things. They do that results thing that the DAC model is, and that's ultimately the summit of what leading is. But they also intentionally create the intellectual content, the intellectual ontology of that the complexity folks do a good job framing, and maybe the psychological safety, to use a common buzzword, but also the efficacy and the alignment and the trust that needs to exist in organizations too. So I see leaders as having all three of those intentions that they balance.
Great. So I see Pamelia summing up a lot of this as coaching and leadership being about relationships, helping leaders be more self-aware, enabled to affect change in the world. Just noting, and it makes sense with coaching as thinking of as a one-on-one relationship, that there's still a lot of centrality on like an individual doing something with coaching. I'm not saying that's good or bad. It's just interesting. We're talking about like a leader. I think there's been some surfacing here of like a group of people could be leading something. Maybe I'll go with a question there. So then there could be group coaching, right? Which might be different than one-on-one coaching. Is that to help a group become self-aware? Just noting a lot of things raised here. Complexity, helping leaders in complexity, and dealing with uncertainty as opposed to just dealing with competencies, right? Their expertise and being able to get something done through expertise, but having to navigate what they're uncertain about. I haven't even gotten to a question, but I'm going to go to David and see if that sparks something.
Yeah, thanks, Jeffrey. I just want to follow up on that by this notion of individuals versus collectives and what does leadership mean? And I think a very powerful set of questions to pose to people are one, instead of thinking about how do I take charge in a particular situation, which is, I think, a very kind of implicit approach a lot of people have to leadership. How do I take charge? How do I lead? How do I become the leader? How do I make things happen? Instead of thinking about the I, think about this notion of participation. What is the best way to participate in this leadership process? And we know that leadership doesn't happen in a vacuum. It requires other individuals involved in shared work for leadership to happen. And sometimes, and this was a very powerful story that came out of the breakout room, sometimes the most important thing you can do as a leader is just listen. And we tend to forget that because we think the leader needs to be out there taking charge, leading the way, being, the person who is massing the troops into battle, to use a very masculine, patronizing, heroic and romanticized notion of leadership that a lot of people have. But when you think about what's the best way for me to participate in this leadership process, can open up a whole new repertoire of ways of leading.
Can I ask Joel and Kelly to respond a bit to that, both complexity, group coaching, but also how coaching can help leaders respond or move away from some of these notions of leadership that we have, or your experiences on that?
I would build on what David was saying. I think coaching is really important in helping people understand the context that they're in and what's appropriate for that stage of the business. So I do think that, like as somebody who experience building startups and then scaling up and then more on the corporate side, I think there are different approaches to leadership at different stages. So, my personal experience right now is in scale up, you're very much pace setting. So all of the coaching skills, yes, are important. So listening and understanding, but I think there's got to be a lot of awareness that, is it time to be a visionary leader? Is it time to have more of an affiliate approach? Is it time to have more of a commanding approach? And I think that there's not a right or wrong answer. And a lot of it is being able to understand what is the context and what do I need to bring into it right now, and then be able to flex when the business gets to the next stage of growth. So, and that is very much a business context response, I realize, but yeah.
It fits for social context too, I think, Kelly, and what you're saying speaks to this idea of helping. Part of leadership is helping people understand what's going on and where they are, making sense of it in a way that's creative, that's generative.
Yeah, and Kelly, can I follow up just about the coaching side of that? So you're talking about leaders knowing when to scale up, when to shift. So and needing to know context. So how does the coach maybe help with that? Maybe they don't. It's okay if coaching's not for, it'd be interesting to explore where coaching is not does not intersect with leadership. That's an interesting way to kind of also get at it. How does the coach help there? And I have a question about this too, which is if the leader's trying to figure out the context, how does the coach either help with that, or how much context does a coach need to have? I know there's several questions.
Are you asking Kelly, or are you just asking Jen?
Let me let Kelly start.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Happy to pass to you. I think, the beauty of coaching is really probing and I think having the individual understand their context of the systemic approach and where is the organization, who are the key stakeholders, what are those relationships within the organization, what does that look like? And I think probably most important is, are they aware of it? So when you're in that coaching frame, do you know who your key stakeholders are? Do you know who you need to work with in order to get things done? And I think the coach's role in that is just building that awareness of the context. So that's where I think coaching really falls in. And then I think there are other benefits, right? Like again, to talk about a pace setting environment, it's if that's the context you're in, how do you recognize burnout in your people? How do you recognize when you're pushing too far? How do you really listen and understand where the business is so that you can balance and not, I guess, go overboard on the pace setting and push too hard? And I think those are things that coaching is great for. Yeah. So Tom, did you want to add?
I just wasn't sure who he was asking.
Oh,
The simple answer is, well, coaching, a lot of coaching is asking good questions. So it's like, what do you think is going on? Or what's the most important thing that you think needs to happen right now? Be examples of simple coaching questions.
Joel?
Yeah, and I think just building little comment on what Kelly's saying there is like there's a universality there of a coach being able to help somebody make sense of their context, the situation they're in. And so, you know, an understanding of that, a systemic understanding of coaching, you can apply that with different types of leaders because there's a universality to the kinds of questions that can help them become aware of the stakeholder relationships that matter the most, the shared purpose you have, and so on. And then I also thought of then mentoring, you know, so it might be that there's a role that, and is this a coach or is this an explicit a mentor who's had experience of being in specific contexts who can then ask experience related questions, you know, that can really help a leader kind of hone in on something that could be really useful and important to them in that situation. So that's why I think that there's a role for mentoring in coaching. There's a role for coaches who have had leadership experience and can bring some of that context awareness that is based on experience as well, not just on a kind of approach to coaching.
Great. David, did you want to jump in or?
Yeah, I'll be a little provocative here and saying part of the challenge with basing the coaching on experience is that what happened 10, 20 years ago may not be relevant now. And, you know, things are changing so quickly. There's a risk of saying, well, you should be doing this because that's what I did back in the day. And that day ain't no more. So having that kind of prescience and that insight that things have changed in very significant ways is important. And it's also the case with mentoring. I think there's two sides to mentoring. There is really no barrier to entry to being a mentor either. So, and there's no training to be a mentor. So some of them are incredibly helpful to people. Others are incredibly unhelpful because they don't really have any of the necessary skills other than the experience of having done it in the past.
So let me just build on the skills and see, maybe this gets at the intersection place. What are the skills that both leaders and coaches should share or do share? Is there a skill set there that we can try to distill a little bit?
Well, I do think that giving people a way to process what they're thinking and what they're learning and to internalize it is part of the learning and development process. So coaches facilitate learning and development, or coaching does. And is that leading? It's leading if you accept the assumption that we need to have people understand their context and to be comfortable with kind of what I'll call the creative tension that they're working in, right? Because people aren't leading if they're in the safe space and the space that doesn't change. They're leading if they can step into that tension space. So
we have active listening and empathy in the chat here. What are there other things? I'm sure there's a lot of coaches on the call here, but what are the skill sets that maybe leaders don't realize that coaches have that they could benefit from? And Joel, Kelly, and Tom, or the chat as well.
I mean, one idea that came up is sense making itself. So that ability to kind of pause and reflect on one's situation to begin to see what might emerge, what new information might emerge that could then lead to new actions or conversations or directions that could be taken. So I know as a leader and a coach, I employ both of those, and that way of being is very useful for me, particularly in these times where it feels like there is just the complexity and uncertainty is amped up a lot. So that sense making capacity, I think, is something we're all being invited into as we see the kind of collective stability that we've had. I think I can say this, like we've been in a more stable era of time, and things are not as stable anymore. So that this is one capacity I think that's central.
So there's something to coaching that's an hour, out of someone's day. So it's a slowing down, perhaps, right, of what's usually a speedy day. I heard emergence. So coaches don't necessarily, and please correct me if you have a different opinion. Coaches don't go right to what the answer is or try to just pull the answer out. Things emerge, and the direction of travel in a coaching session that direction may change. You may start in one direction, something comes up, and it means you got to make a choice about going in another direction. And that is a skill, perhaps, Joel, you're suggesting. It'd be interesting to hear others comment on this about leadership. Leaders could use, where it tends to be, we've got the strategy or the goal, and we're just headed straight in that direction with almost no room for anything to happen, even though we know the world is happening and there's externalities all around us. So I don't know if I leave it there and let four of you take that wherever you'd like.
Well, I'll jump here as the non-coach and say that one of the things to avoid, both as a leader and as a coach, in my opinion, and this is opinion, is this notion of offering problem solutions. This is what you should do. This is the solution to your problem. And the reason why, and you think, well, isn't that what a leader does? Well, actually, a leader should be helping the people they work with to solve their own problems, because otherwise they're going to have every problem in the unit dumped on their desk. And it creates this kind of dependence on a leader, much like a dependence on a coach can happen as well. And this is something I'd like to hear from our coaching experts around this notion of long-term coaching engagements and the risk of dependence with our students. Remember, these are emerging leaders. They're all, it's great to work with them because you can see the change happening almost on a week-to-week kind of basis. But deliberately, we make them change coaches every semester, simply because we do not want them to become dependent on any one particular coach or any one particular set of frameworks or perspectives, especially as they are just emerging into understanding themselves as a leader. So, Tom and Kelly and Joel, what's your perspective on these kind of long-term coaching engagements, and how do you see this in terms of a potential conflict of interest?
I think you can have a long-term coaching relationship without it being a dependent relationship. But I think there's got to be, and that's, really up to the coach to really set a cadence and really ensure that it doesn't become a dependent relationship. But I know of quite a few people that have been working with the same coach for years, and really getting a lot of benefit from it. Where I see it go wrong is when you're talking about a relationship where there's, multiple sessions, maybe even happening a week. There's, a dependence on that coach, in order to be able to make a decision, having to run, and it becomes more of like a consultancy almost, rather than a coaching relationship. So I think you can have a long-term relationship, and you really need to be clear with the boundaries.
Just pointing out important distinction there that we won't have full time to probably get into, but that boundary of advisor, coach, consultant, maybe all at once sometimes, but how you set those boundaries. But if you want to respond to that, and to Kelly's, Joel, if you want to jump in from the coaching perspective, it'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great that you do that with your students. It's really healthy. So I think it's a both and for me. I think I know in my own experience that I've just there's a certain even if you're not becoming dependent on a coach, there's a certain kind of logos, a certain philosophy that they're bringing to you, and and that can be really empowering and really developmental. And it can also be really healthy to then switch coaches and enter that person's world, and the distinctions they bring, the questions they ask, what are they sensing about you? And so I just started working with a new coach recently, and actually, I'm still acclimatizing to the way she sees, and it's a little bit confronting, but it's also very stimulating because it's having me let go of some of the comfortable vernacular that had kind of arisen with my older coaches. So, but that being said, I agree with what Kelly's saying. I think you can have long-term relationships. I think it's really important that the coach is sensitive to that dependency. Of course, there's a level where I'm going as a coach to question my client if I notice they're asking questions which are actually wanting me to tell them my opinion about things, solve problems for them. So that's one of the first things I'm going to start to kind of reflect back and look into. But yeah, I think naturally over time, there can be a kind of just a dependency emerging. But I think the last thing I would say is I've worked with some coaches and they just had this maturity to them, this wisdom to them that was just exquisite, and rarefied. And so I just enjoyed being in a long-term, almost guild-like connection with them, where incredibly beautiful relationship. There's a word I'm looking for, which I can't find, but so I think it can be both, basically.
Yeah. I think if you're a manager, your staff member, your direct can be dependent on you too. And you learn to help to delegate them and to them in ways that's developmental if you're a good manager. And if you're a coach, you meet the person that you have, and if they are, constantly coming to you for reassurance, for example, and I'm thinking of a client that would go on and on and on justifying a decision she wanted to make, just observing that and reflecting that pattern back with that client was pretty transformative. So I think you've got to, I think, rely on the coach to not exploit that dependent relationship. And certainly for undergraduates, David, I love the idea of having them broaden their experience, and many of them are not mature enough to actually break some of that pattern.
Yeah, they really don't like changing coaches. And I imagine your clients don't like the thought of changing coaches. And you probably, as a coach, don't like the thought of them changing coaches. But developmentally, I think, especially in early years, it's really important to get different perspectives and different frames, different ways of thinking about problems and thinking about the self as a leader.
Before we go into breakout groups, I have one last question. Maybe it's a build on what I'm hearing. But I'm curious, Kelly, you said Ezra's been built over the last 5 years, to huge extent. Joel, I know that you have like 6,000 coaches in training, or right, something like that. Large number of coaches are signed up for Coaches Rising. David, you're using coaches formally at Claremont McKenna. It seems that there has been a rise in coaching. As David said at the beginning, folks thought coaching was for remediation. Today, maybe it's a social ID. I've seen still both sides of it. I'm not sure everyone's fully open to coaching. Tell me if I'm wrong, but why the rise in coaching in the last 5 years? It seems like the rise in coaching in the last 20. Why is this something that's become is it more formalized? But why do we see this rise?
I can jump in real quick with Ezra. Just one of the reasons. There are many. I think as a business, we tend to, I guess, compete for the same budget as training and development. So I think what we're seeing in organizations is that the thought of teaching or training at a group of individuals with a one-size-fits-all type of a program is not as effective as one-on-one development that really meets somebody where they are. And that while per person coaching is a more significant investment, the results of coaching are much, much better than your typical training and development within organizations.
So one-to-one learning, one-to-one training and development is more effective than large learning and development programs. Great.
Yeah. Yeah.
That said, I'll put on my academic hard hat here and say the concrete results of coaching really haven't been established as far as I'm concerned. I mean, and I'm not saying that it's not effective. I'm just saying the evidence that it is effective and it is more effective than other kinds of interventions have not been publicly available. So there's still more work to be done to show, there's a lot of talk about return on investment, and I don't like that conversation because it tends to come down to, how much has coaching or training brought back in terms of revenue or other kinds of concrete financial outcomes. Because if we're really interested in this notion of leader development, the outcome should be how much change have we established in this individual or individuals as a result of a given intervention. And it's really that change and that development is what is then applied in order to make them more effective leaders. So I don't think that the coaching makes people more effective leaders. I think it helps to build the capabilities that, if they're applied appropriately, can make them better leaders. And that's a very different question. And it's a difficult question to evaluate. But the thing that coaching does provide that training doesn't is this individualization. I mean, training, comes from the mindset that people start at the same place and change in the same way. And coaching is really much more about, well, people enter into this leadership business, this leadership domain from very different places, and their trajectories of change are very different over time. And the coaching is very sensitive to that. And that could make it more effective than some of these other kinds of interventions. But the other problem, and it was alluded to in a couple of conversations, is the scalability. The cost associated with coaching, and this notion is it just that the rich are getting richer? Are the high potential leaders in organizations getting the coaches? And, the ones who could really benefit from the coaching because they are the low potential or the no potential people don't have access to coaches. So that's another kind of egalitarian question about coaching. Is this only for certain cadres of leaders in organization, and what is that creating in terms of the kind of culture about some people are coached and other people are not? There's a lot going on there. Sorry.
Yeah, Kelly.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in, and I agree, David, with so I think deserts of the world have found a way to scale to some degree. There's further work to be done there. But in terms of the data and the research, we are seeing that now. And we've been really lucky to work with organizations where they give us access to data, and we're able to measure success in populations within an organization that have received coaching and haven't. And I know there are a lot of variables, and it's our science lab that works with the organizations that collect this. I'm not a researcher myself, but we do have researchers. But the evidence is there, and we're starting to see that shared and published more broadly, that a one-on-one developmental approach through coaching is more impactful and drives better results for individuals and organizations. So I think we'll see more and more of that in the
Just,
future.
That's great to hear. I would just be really interested in to know what those outcomes are.
Yeah, it'd be great to see the research. I mean, logically, in a classroom setting, just thinking in terms of cognitive development and learning, there's there's only so much up the hierarchy that you can get through the classroom experience, and so there needs to be some way to follow up with people as they apply that and internalize that and individuate that. And coaching is an excellent, I think, framework for that type of activity. If it's intentionally part of the program.
Joel, I'd love to get your thoughts on
Just
that.
a quick kind of musing, really. Like I'm with everyone and what they're saying. I just feel like it's also this part of the times we're in. Like there's a need for coaching. It works. Yes, we need to kind of take a more scientific approach to verify the exact impact it's having. But for me, I look at like the shifts we're going through on a global level as well, and it just seems like a natural response to the uncertainty and the complexity we're facing. And I think coaching has always existed for thousands of years in some form or another. And there's something about the kind of macroeconomic state of the world that's allowed for this new configuration of it. And I mean, maybe we have some more time for this, but there's just something in the air, that people care about meaning and purpose. And we're deeply questioning a lot of the institutions and structures that have been guiding us over the last years. And they're all, to me, about what coaching is doing on an individual or group level too. So, yeah, I'm very curious about that.
So I'm just gonna pause. This is great because we're at a good place of really positive tension as well. So I want to let you all have a chance to talk about this in breakout rooms. So we're getting ready for that. I hear some issues of how we measure, which is always a little problematic when we're talking about human development, about decision making, about thinking about progress versus outcomes. This comes up a lot for me in work I do and I see, which is everyone wants to measure the outcomes. They don't measure the process or the progress being made, which is part of starting to deal with complexity. So these are things I'm hearing about. To David's point, right there, I've been in learning and development as well. In the corporate setting, and I think the outcomes are just as mixed, just to be fair about how much, going in for a training program, and as to coaching as well, we need better measures. So that's something we could talk about. So I think this is all good. We started off with a question about informal coaching as well for the group, and I just want to come back to Joel's. My question was sort of why the rise all of a sudden here. Part of that might be exploring how has coaching existed before this formal coaching, or how could it exist as well, right? How can it exist if it can't scale formally? And maybe formal is important. Does it exist in other ways? All things we could talk about in breakouts. So I think, Jonathan, if you want to take folks to break out for, we'll try to get 15 minutes. I think you'll all want to discuss that for this amount of time. We'll come back with your questions for the panel. Hopefully keep up this great discussion. Thank you all. All right. Well, welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a productive conversation start. I'm hoping that I pulled you out right at the as things were still meaty. Before we dive into questions, I just want to give our panelists a chance to sort of talk about anything that's coming up with them, with their organizations, a little sort of commercial break opportunity here to share anything they'd like briefly. So
yeah, since Joel and Kelly and David didn't know it was coming, I'll just go ahead and start. And just say, I really just want to make sure that people know how to find the calendar. Oops, that's not the calendar. That's our producer's room. The calendar coming up Monday the 9th, about 2 weeks from now. We have Paul Crick, who's in the room today. We're going to talk about something called the concept of affordances, which is one of our favorites. We'll get you hopefully excited about that. And we have here, you can see our schedule that's open till after the holiday break, being in January. and we're scheduling now until June, which is our end of our season. So we'll continue to add stuff there, and I'll just give you the link right here. I'll take the link and put it in the SharePoint. And also, we're a volunteer organization. We spend about $8,000 a year more on tools and stuff like that than we take in. So if anybody feels like they want to donate, I'll give you that link too.
Yeah. So if any of the other panelists have programs or something they want to make this group aware of, happy to have you jump in and share. Joel.
Yeah, I just want to start by saying we had an extraordinary conversation in our breakout that really moved me, and I think speaks beautifully into this topic. So I hope we get the chance to talk about that. Maybe some of those people will come live, because I think it's just hits for me right in the heart of what the intersection between coaching and leadership. I'll just name really quickly, we've got a leadership coaching program aptly enrolling right now, considering the topic of our conversation today. It is called Reimagine Leadership. And it's our attempt at reimagining the role that leadership coaches can play and the kind of skills that they might need. And we've got people like Bob Anderson, Nicholas Yanni, Peter Hawkins, Marita Freejohn, and others on the faculty. So yeah, you can just head to coachesrising.com and find the program there. So.
Thanks, Joel. Kelly or David, you want to jump in, or are you all?
I would say like something exciting at Ezra we announced recently. We are always experimenting with emerging technology, and we've launched a new solution called Focus, which is one-to-one coaching. And I have to be very clear, our goal is not to replace coaching with live humans, but we have introduced AI to help with the space between sessions. So that's something that we are working on now and measuring to see if we can use AI to really engage people better between sessions with that reflection, action, learning, and pulling through the I guess, homework between sessions if we see that helps us gain better results with the coaching. So that's really exciting.
Thanks, Kelly.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm on sabbatical this year, so I got nothing nothing to sell, but I do want to give you a heads up that I am writing a book as part of the sabbatical process around developing leaders and leadership principles, processes, and practices. So I have a contract with Paul Grave Macmillan of the Springer Nature Group, and that should be delivered in early 2024. So maybe it might be published in later 2024. I'll keep Tom apprised of this, so he can keep the community apprised of this. For those of you who are interested in learning a little bit more about leadership from my perspective.
Yeah, publishing a book is a great reason to come to Voices and be a guest. So,
thanks, David. All right, before we get to your questions and hopefully opening the ones that Joel mentioned were in your breakout groups, we're trying our elephant in the room for the first time today. So to see how this goes, I'm going to turn it over to Tiffany for one or two questions that came to her that we'll put to the panel. So panel, deep breath. Here we go, Tiffany.
One or two questions. Okay, so someone shared, I'm impressed by our panelists, many of whom I didn't know this morning. However, a big elephant in our collective room to me is, how would the conversation shift if one of our panelists was a person of color?
Yeah, that's a great question. And since I'm the executive producer, I'll say we agree with that question, and we strive to have more diversity. And I even noticed that when we looked at the panel at the start here, that this is it's great to have one woman with these four white men, but this is still not a diverse panel that we would like to see. So thank you for the question. I will say that I'm excited that in our season this year, where in the past I was always the host most of the time, we have a whole gaggle of 8 people that are hosts, and 2 of which are people of color. We're very happy to make sure that that's a more integrated, diverse group.
Thank you, Tom. The next question is a collective question, and this is to all the panelists. Are leaders and coaches focused on the right thing? Are we even answering the right question? Do we limit ourselves? If the world is on fire and we spend $366 billion a year, every year, on leadership development, why are we standing on a platform?
No. Tiffany, we just lost you. If you can type the rest of that question into
You might have
chat.
fallen off the call.
Let me follow up actually to her first question for the panel. I don't know much about the whole leadership, the whole coaching field and what it looks like, but I've been approached by folks who have been doing organizational change, working with CEOs and top management for 40 years, a lot more experience than me, to find coaches who are people of color or are minorities, for folks, people in senior leadership positions they are working with, and they're having trouble finding coaches. And to be fair, those leaders are asking for folks who look, feel, or come from maybe similar cultural backgrounds from them. So I think this is a question that first one was also getting at, if you want to take a shot at that.
Well, we can, but I also think we kind of got the gist of the second question, which is, are we focused on the right things? Why are we spending all this money, and the world is burning, and is there enough? Are we doing enough? It speaks to the kind of the founding, the background story of the Prometheus project, because obviously the answer is we're not shifting the dial, moving the line, whatever it is, fast enough or as effectively enough. So the question that sparked the formation of this group is, it must be a structural problem and not a technical problem, right? We can't keep doing more and spending more and expect to change the trajectory. So what is the structure that we're in that keeps us from opening this flow of leadership and change? And so that, while we talk about leadership conceptually and the framework and model, because we have to have that coherence, the questions of what is it structurally that we're doing is fair. And I'll just throw my own elephant in the room question, because I struggle with this all the time. I think a lot of people in the coaching community are very comfortable and attracted to that inner introspective story, and that story about letting things emerge. And I'm not comfortable that some of that isn't avoiding the action and avoiding the responsibility of making change or dealing with structural issues in our workplaces and in society.
I'll invite panelists to jump in on either of those questions.
Yeah, I'll jump in, because I definitely have a perspective on the massive amounts of money that are invested in leadership development with very little return on investment, if we want to use that term, or evidence of return on investment. I think leadership programs have become commodities in a very large marketplace, where the competition is, how do I sell? How do I sell my program to this company? And once I sell it to this company, then others are going to want it because that other company has it. And it becomes less about developing individuals to be better leaders than it is about selling a particular commodity in the marketplace of leadership development. So I think one of the, and this is, where I give kudos to coaching, because coaching, I think, has the potential to really have profound influences on individuals and their development, not only as leaders, but as people, as adults, when it's done appropriately. The concern I have about coaching is this notion of, is it just at the apex of the pyramid, or how do we make it available to those lower in the pyramid? And Ezra, I think, has an interesting business model where that's becoming more likely. I think, and maybe you coaches are not going to like to hear this, but I think AI could radically change the availability of coaching to people more in the base of the pyramid. And that's where we need to focus on. Think about the massive amount of leadership potential that is wasted by focusing at the top with high potentials.
I guess if I could ask David a question on that, curious. I agree about cascading and offering development organizational wide. Are we missing though, if we're coaching just say 10% of an organization, the ripple effect that coaching has across the organization? So it's not just about the leaders who are being coached, but it's developing them as coaches and the impact they have across the organization as well, which I do think that there's value there. And again, to your point, how do we measure it? And can we measure it effectively? I don't know, but I think it goes beyond the individuals being coached for sure.
That's a great point. And you're right. I see Mark had just put something in the chat that might help us on that. But also think about these kind of trickle down effects or cascading effects. And to think about how many layers are between those at the top 10% and those who are, down in the trenches. And what does it take to actually have that cascading effect reach them? And I think as organizations become flatter, maybe there is a greater likelihood of that kind of cascading effect. We need more evidence, I would say, with my scientist hat on, that those kind of cascading effects are happening. And I think part of it is how coaching is positioned about helping those who are at lower levels in the organization become leaders themselves, as opposed to just further advancing those who are already at the top.
So I like to think that the shift in focus of leadership that I am articulating in the framework is part of this, is that we're so used to coaching leaders to help get things done, the DAC model, which I like, which is part of that's why we exist as an organization, to fulfill the mission. But I think where leaders could reach farther in the organization is focus on the other two outcomes: is, do we understand what's going on? And are we working together well? Are we creating the alchemy in our teams and our locations, and how do we do that? And having those conversations as much as the are we getting things done conversations.
Joel, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I was just curious. Maybe we don't have time for questions from the listeners or not, because my point will build on something that Marlene brought in, and I don't want to steal her thunder if she wants to come forward and kind of share her point or not. So
you good with that, Joel? Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, she really touched me, because our breakout really moved me, and it just reminded me why I love coaches. It's just such beautiful, passionate people. And what Marlene shared was how she's going through a dark night of the soul. I'm going to speak for you, Marlene, here, so please give me some forgive me if I misrepresent a little bit, but this dark night of the soul she's going through, where she's like, are we just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic? And as a coach, am I just coaching inside of a system that is breaking down? And I've been through that journey myself. This sense of like, am I coaching in, particularly with organizations, and feeling like, is this, but the world is burning outside, and I'm trying to help you function in your team, but there's these systemic issues at play here, which are really feeding into the leader in the team, and we're not having these bigger conversations. So I think for me, this is where like coaching and leadership comes together in one sense, is that the coaches can have one foot inside the conventional view and be kind of one foot at the edge of sense making of what's going on around the world, and play the role of a provocateur as well. So not just to, but this is a controversial point I'm getting into, So traditionally coaching has been like, you follow the client's agenda. And so, what is the role of a coach here in being a provocateur, of questioning some of the deeper beliefs that are embedded inside of these systems, which are inadequate for us to respond to these multipolar crises? And I don't have answers to that, but I mean, you know, if you listen to some of these speakers, it's incredibly confronting and sobering, like deeply. So how do we respond as a community?
I think that's a good place to listen to the community and the burning questions you have to build off Joel's point there. Do folks have questions they want to ask, or that came out of their reflections that the panel can reflect on?
You want to weigh in, use the raised hand feature down at under the reactions button, and it'll put you up invisible to Jeff. You can call on you.
Can I just respond quickly to Joel as we're waiting for other I mean, I think that's the live wire right there, Joel, because who pays your bills? I mean, does your client pay your bills, or does that company, the organization, pay your fees? And if you are asking your clients to examine assumptions about some of the historical inequities in their system, where the system is paying you as a coach, that creates some interesting dynamics.
I agree as well. Yeah, I don't have a full answer on this, and yeah,
the messiness of the actual world. Bashir.
Let me just chime in before we switch to Bashir. And this, just an anecdote. I can remember working with a couple clients from one company, and all of those clients, it was such a toxic environment for them. All of them were at their edge in their thread of breaking down, people leaving all around them, and while I was trying to help them with their own resilience and their own sense of how they might affect their experience, I couldn't help but have the feeling that we coaches were there to kind of make it okay that the management was running a toxic organization. And I think there's a big ethical issue right there that I think David's sparking with. Yeah.
All right, Bashir, we're close. We haven't left that much time for questions, but let's
very quick.
Yeah.
On the previous point mentioned, coaches as witnesses. Coaches cannot make change the human condition. It is inevitable. They can provide the best of advice, and that cannot be changed. I mean, obviously, if the company is willing to change it, it would change. I just put in the chat a link on NATO alternative analysis. The pain of the Bay of Pigs and groupthink always looms in the military, so they've developed sets of techniques, and also there's red teaming. Over. Thank you.
So red teaming, watching out for groupthink.
To prevent groupthink, and if you check the alternative analysis book, it has series of games, so that would contribute to thinking skills. So it's very useful and very widely used.
Great. Any thoughts just from the panel on this, and what role a coach plays or do they in red teaming or alternative analysis? Maybe we're talking about the borders there. Just want to give folks a chance, and then
with an imaginary client would be, what do they want? And if they want to fix something that needs a red team, how do they advocate for that? And how do they feel about taking that risk? And so that would be the coaching piece of it for me.
Great. So I know we're coming up to the hour. I want to respect our guests' time. I don't know how much they may be able to go over. We'll stick around, those who can, for a few minutes, but wanted, if you needed to go, give you a last thought to, you can make it a coaching moment. Are there questions or something critical in the field here of coaching and leadership we should be thinking about? I'm also welcome to what your last thoughts are as well, Kelly, David, Joel, and Tom.
Final thoughts from the panel.
Just repeat that question.
So I do invite you not to necessarily have a statement, but is there a core question, Joel? I think you were raising some of the core questions here, but something you want to leave us with, something that needs more unpacking, or a critical thought to further this discussion, because clearly 2 hours wasn't enough time. What's something we should all be thinking about and reflecting on coming
If
out
we
of
had more time, where would we go?
I'll throw something out here. Can a robot be a good coach?
Love that. Can a robot be a good coach?
I'd say the democratization versus the commoditization of coaching.
Kelly, do you want to?
Like of anything that big, I would just say, listening to the last conversation, just to end on some positive note, I would say, in my experience, that most of the organization, well, all of the organizations we work with, really genuinely, one of the reasons they're working with us is they do want insights into what they can do better as organizations. So I think one of the beautiful things we can share is kind of this aggregated, anonymized insights, unfiltered information back to the organization. And I think that that's a really powerful thing. And I think shows that organizations really do want to do better by their people, and they will take action off of that.
Yeah, interesting. And Kelly, I'll just say that that's the vast majority of my experience too, is that the organizations are using coaching for the right reasons. I would guess I'd say the thing I'd follow up on is this idea of not only AI and replacing coaches, but managers replacing coaches, and each of us replacing coaches, because I'd like us all to have that level of skill and insight and talent with each other. And if there's a tension, commercial tension versus doing good tension, sometimes we want to preserve the professionalism and the exclusivity of it because it's how we make our money. And I would say I'd like to see that evolve beyond that and find other ways to make our money. There'll still be ways to make our money.
Thank you. Thank you all for the great discussion and good thoughts. I do invite folks to stick around for those who can spend a few more minutes over the hour. The panelists are welcome to stay, or if you need to hop off. I know you all have busy lives. So thank you all. If you do stick around, I still have this question about the rise of coaching here, and where we're talking about democratization and egalitarianism of it. And going back to the very first question, are we missing this in our lives in some way? I suppose it's a leading question. We know, at least in the US, there's a rise in, loneliness, isolation. People don't seem to have, as many contacts and people to lean into. Where does coaching in our lives or professionally play a role there, then supported also by, professional coaching? If we want to get this to spread widely, we've got the rise of
coaching is good parenting. That's what you're getting at, for example.
We talked about coaches in the community. I mean, I don't know what the first discussion you had in groups of 3, but there seems to be this need. Leaders feel, in all aspects, feeling maybe isolated, and so they need someone to talk to, maybe get a third perspective. Is there a rise now because we need it more because the world is more complex, or is it because we can't find it outside somewhere else?
You're asking about the rise in coaching, professional coaching?
That's sort of something we see. I'm asking if there's a symptom of other things that would help us understand what coaches could do more with, for leaders, what leaders may have to do more with in coaching. We're talking about systemic stuff here.
I'll be the cynic of the group. I mean, I think the rise of coaching has a lot to do with people seeing a competitive advantage of having a coach. And that's created this kind of felt or perceived need. And it's also a relatively scarce commodity, or it had been in the past at least. And we can go back to, microeconomics 101, supply and demand. And if there's a limited supply of coaches and, I demand one because that I see is going to help me get ahead. But again, that's more of the cynic in me talking, and I'm not in the trenches doing coaching. And those of you who are probably maybe have a different perspective on that.
I invite the audience in on this. Like, we're a small group now. Shift to conversation if you all have a perspective.
Yeah, can I say something?
Yeah, thanks, Bill.
With coaching, I believe it has risen in popularity for an unconscious reason, which is that it's about co-regulation. And co-regulation comes from the polyvagal theory that what puts people into the parasympathetic or rest and recover state is being able to engage with someone else. And when a coach really does that and does it well, then that engages the person. And I think there's a great potential for training team leaders as coaches to spread coaching right through an organization so that it isn't contained at the top, so to speak, but goes right through. And I think when you get the staff themselves engaged in answering the questions rather than asking the questions, that changes the dynamic altogether. So when a staff member is saying to a team leader, "What do you want me to do about so-and-so?" When the team leader turns around and says, "Well, what have you done so far? And what ideas do you have?" Yes, I can give you an idea, but I'd rather you give me one. And they encourage the people to come to them with suggested solutions rather than the problem. It changes the dynamic completely. And certainly I've seen it have a remarkable effect. I don't know if any of you agree with that.
Pamelia, did you want to jump in? Thanks, Bill.
Yes, thank you. I agree, Bill. I just took some recent training in polyvagal therapy, and I have a certification in neuroscience. So I keep adding to my coach knowledge based on what I see in my clients. So that, just keep learning, keep adding more. But I always feel like the solution is be the change that you want to see. I am involved in my local ICF chapter. Through that chapter, we're very active in doing pro bono coaching and working with underprivileged groups and organizations and agencies. We partner with social workers and give them training. So when they go out in the field and work with clients, they're using coaching principles or tactics. So I think there's a lot of coaches that are able to give back. Like, I am not one of those. Yeah. There's a new wave of coaches. I come from an underprivileged background. That's where my heart is. I am not interested in being an executive coach and coach the C-suite. I am interested in that middle level and lower level management. Where I progressed through to middle level management before I left the workplace. I saw the struggles firsthand. I was in the struggle. So that's where my heart works. And a lot of coaches, they have capacity to give back. And I think that's how we changed. We can't rely on corporations to do everything for us. As individuals, we have power, we have capacity, we have agency, and we can get involved, or we can start our own groups that do these things, like what Tom is doing. So I think that we have to be the change. We can't just say there needs to be a change. We have to be it.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
Paul, I saw your hand was up. Did you want to jump in, or? Oh, you're on mute.
Yes, I've got this figured out, but hey, just building on Bill's point, well, both points actually. I think this idea of the polyvagal theory is really, really important. And in fact, if you look at Gabor Mate's work and how the interpersonal neurobiology actually plays into it, there's a level beyond and below psychiatry, psychotherapy, and psychology, all of which inform coaching practice, all of which inform leader development to a degree that we as yet are not embracing widely enough, in my humble opinion, in the coaching profession. I also think I think, Joel, it was your point around this night of the dark soul, what are we doing and are we doing the right things? I think in terms of solutioning and encouraging, if you take the example, and this plays to the co-regulation point, if you take the example of the Dutch supermarket chain that instituted checkouts that allowed basically conversations, so it wasn't about throughput, it wasn't speed, it was all about sitting down, talking with the customers, engaging and connecting. I don't think we look at this enough. If we look at the research behind psychotherapy, it's not the modality that creates the result, it's the connection, it's the therapeutic alliance. And if it's the therapeutic alliance, then it will also be the coaching alliance, because for talking therapies, it's the same thing, broadly speaking.
Yeah.
And
in fact, one thing that serves that is to look at NLP as the toolkit, because NLP really is much wider than the whole of psychology and the whole of all of these therapies. It includes all of them, because NLP is a description of the way human beings do everything that human beings do. So
yeah, I think there are some challenges with that. In terms, there are some presentational issues in certain quarters, and I think there is a way to back into that, but to present it as pure neurolinguistic programming, then I think that would probably meet with resistance in a lot of quarters for all the right reasons, in terms of the base. But I think it offers a lot, because of the foundations on which it was built, which was proper science. So Gestalt, Fritz Perls, Virginia Satir's work in families, and so on.
Thank you. Is it Jean?
Yeah, Genevieve. And thank you very much. It was a really thought-provoking session. I have a lot of things to say, but I will just go to one or two things. I am an NLP trainer myself. I spent more than 7 years becoming an NLP trainer, but it's not accepted everywhere.
Yeah.
Sometimes people don't want you to use the NLP tools, but a lot of other training has borrowed from NLP actually. So the second thing I wanted to say is that leadership has many facets. And I am really seeing it since I am coaching leaders in African continents. So there are some aspects of the leadership that we understand in the Western societies that are slightly different in the African continents. So it's also important that when we are talking about leadership, that we try and see to which extent it can apply to all cultures and everywhere. That's something very, very important for me. I'm working on it with my colleagues in Africa, but leadership is just not one size fits all.
Yeah.
That's what I just wanted to share.
Maybe I'll try to follow up with you, Jean, but I have a few, by circumstance, coaching clients in big companies that are West African, Nigerian, and Ghanaian. And all their challenges working in Western companies is they're so direct, and they're so they have such urgency.
Absolutely about giving feedback. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Tom, for highlighting it. It's very, very, it's a real challenge for them. So we also need to take the thing in that context. I did a webinar in Malawi, and one of the questions that really struck me is that I have a feedback for somebody in my team, but he's older than me. I cannot give him any feedback because I cannot talk to him in that way. So it's really challenging, and we need to find a way to help them, because otherwise, we're not really being the example to follow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Culture and context make
absolutely
huge difference. Any last thoughts here? It's a very rich conversation. Obviously, much more to talk about. We'll get this
Maybe
posted.
Marlene maybe is our final.
Oh, Marlene, yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I find there's a lot of talk about coaching, a lot of talk about leadership. But I'm really pondering, do we need to talk more about the fact that we are earthlings? We share this planet with other living beings. We're a species that stood up on our hind legs just the other day. And also, even if the earthlings idea doesn't resonate, we are human beings first and foremost. And the question is, how are we better leaders? How are we better coaches? But might it be helpful to also ask, how are we better human beings?
I love your question, but to me, it runs into the language problem that we have, because people hear leadership and they still process authority. And I hear leadership and I think of what leaders do, and I think it's meet each other as humans is part of what leaders do. And so I think the answer to your question is yes, leaders should meet each other as humans and build our understanding and openness and appreciation of who everyone is in our community or organization.
We lost that.
Yeah, sorry, Jeffrey, just very quickly. I mean, Tom, I shared with Sandrine and Joel and a few others. I even my dark night of the soul is I'm also pondering, our language. Do we need to change our language? If you think of the words we use and what they mean, and our stories, the stories we live from, the myths we live from. I don't know if anybody knows Ursula Le Guin's short story, Walking Away from Amelas. But that story I keep going back to. What do we do once we know? And I won't spoil it for you if you haven't read the story. Thank you.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Languages. We could do a whole series of voices sessions on language and how it gets in our way and how it's possible to be used better. So the problem with changing language, if anybody's in Dave Snowden world here, he doesn't want to use any common language because it's too loaded. He wants to use scientific language. And so it creates this tension of trying to understand what exactly he's talking about because we don't have that background. But then he complains because people start to co-opt and adopt his language and use it. I mean, there's no way to break that cycle. We have to, I think it's rather than pick new language, we have to pick a new relationship to language, maybe is where I sit.
Or as in the four agreements, it says, be impeccable with your language, which means it's the way you use it rather than what you say. So,
all right.
Thank you, Jeffrey, for such a good session.
Thank you, Bill.
We might need a language NLP panel or something like that too.
All right. Thank you, everyone, so much. Looking forward to seeing you all at the next one, and feel free to write, comment. Take care.